Hello and welcome to Victor George Leather Goods Knife Sheath School Volume 7 here at my YouTube channel. And today I'm going to take you through the complete process for you to build a scout carry or horizontal carry knife scabbard for an SE PR4 spear point knife. This can be worn cross draw or small of the back. So like usual, I'm going to take you through my grid measurement pattern method. Should be fairly self-explanatory once you watch it. And let's go ahead and get started. Let's build this. Let's go ahead and take a quick overview of this Scout Carry scabbard that we're going to build today. It is held on by sewing with a double row of stitching, and there's no need for safety straps on this one. It's a medium to hard draw. That is not coming out of there unless you pull it. And then when it's reinserted, you have the positive lock based on the stop lock notch that we're going to design into this. Now, I'm also going to show you a method for adding a vertical carry strap for the back for the user's option. And then lastly, a very simplified version with a single row stitching and Chicago screw type hardware for the straps. This is an easy version of this build, and that's what we're going to show you today. So let's start on the pattern. Let's go ahead and start the pattern process, and this is the pattern that we're going to design for the PR4 spear point from EC. All right, so what we're going to need is a standard 8.5 by 11 sheet of cardstock. Draw a center line, set your knife directly on the center with the spear point, and the rounded handle makes it easy to center it on that line. And this is the sheath that we're going to design and build on this video. So the first thing that I do is I need to establish some measurements. But before we do that, let me go ahead and tell you that I'm using a Fiskars graph ruler, usually available at office supply houses or from Fiskars themselves. This is a graph ruler from Hobby Lobby type stores and a standard Lutz 6 protractor. Okay, we're also going to need a 5/8 inch washer, and that's pretty much it as far as the design is concerned. All right, so we're going to do some grid type measurements. It makes it easier for me to design and to explain. And so from the very spear point, we're going to go 1.5 inches up and center your ruler line onto the center line and draw a line across like that. From that line up, we're going to go 2 inches from that line. So make sure that all these lines made up. And then from the second line up one more time, 2 inches. And again, use that center line, use all the grid lines because you want a truly symmetrical pattern. From that line, we're going to go up another 2 inches, and that is our initial grid pattern for this build. Make sure I'm on camera. Yep. Okay. All right. So once we have that, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to establish some tick measurement marks. So you'll notice on this particular sheath, it just doesn't come up evenly. It does taper out a little bit, and to take that into to make that happen, we need to do some measuring lines. So the very first line at the bottom right here, we're going to split 2 1/4 inches. So using a self-centering ruler, I'm going to set the 0 mark on that center line. I'm going to line up my 2. So for a 2 1/4 inch, I need to split that to 1 1/8. I'm just going to put a little tick at 1 1/8, and the same over here. Now the second line up is going to be 2.5 inches. And we'll do the same thing. Line up all our lines, so that'll be 1 1/4 inches split. All right, this next one here is 2 5/8 overall, and we're going to split that from that 0.2. So that is a little bit more mathematically challenging for me. So I will split 2 5/8 by doing 1 inch and then 1, 2 1/2 on that. And we're going to go 1 and then 1, 2, it's 1, 2 1/2. Okay, so you might have to play this a couple of times, but those are the 3 initial measurements. Now, from these 2 top measurements, using the center line, we're going to take the tick and we're going to go straight up. So we'll line it on that tick, and we will line up our center line so that everything is 100% accurate. And we'll do the same thing on the other side. Keep all your north, east, west, and south lines true, and we have that. Now all we need to do is connect these lines to that first line, and those will be nothing more than just straight line connections. And then this one, you can start seeing that slight taper that we're looking for. Take your time. All right, now we have that. Now let's go ahead and take our protractor for the spear point, and I'm going to give myself a 1/2 inch welt there. So the nice thing about this protractor is from the bottom of these numbers up to here, it's a 1/2 inch. So I'm just going to lay that on the edge, as you can see there, on the edge of the blade. And I'm going to draw it to the center line. And then I'm going to do the same thing between these 2 lines. And give me that right there. Replicate that on the other side. Okay, now we have our spear point. Now what we want to do is we want to establish our handle cover here. That you have a couple of options here. Option number 1, on this one here, you see it's a slight rounded effect, and on this one here, it's more of a straight with the corners rounded. So I think, and also that it's about 1/8 of an inch from the edge of the sheath. So we're going to take and we're going to make a line 1/8 of an inch. Now you can do that 1/4 inch if you like. Of course, that makes the top a little narrower. It's something that you can draw a couple of these and then decide for yourself what you want. All right, once I have that, then I'm going to take my 5/8 washer, and I'm going to come up here to the spear point. It's a little bit too pointy for me, so I'm just going to run that right up there. And round off the nose a little bit. Now, the nice thing about this washer also is you can give yourself a nice little smooth transition here at the bottom. And you can do it to the other side as well. Okay, now here's where your option comes in. On this particular build, I just took the protractor and I set it on this line just below the half guard and centered everything as best as I can, and I gave myself a little rounded top. If you don't want that rounded top, all you have to do is come up here to the very top and then round it like that, and that'll give you this effect. All right, so we'll continue with this rounded top since that's what we're building. And we're gonna take our 5/8 inch washer and we're going to just soften these corners a little bit. And of course you can use anything you want to do this. I just happen to have this washer that works for this pattern. And as you can see here, we're softening that corner. All right, now it's time to do a little bit of welt work. And the first thing that we're gonna do is we're gonna, on these outside lines right here, I'm just gonna go 1/2 inch because my welts are gonna be 1/2 inch. So I will take it to right there and I will run it to that line. And then just following this second line, the straight line, I will run my welt to that and it flows into the 1/2 inch welt down here. We're gonna do the same thing on this side. 1/2 inch. And of course now you can easily see the taper. And that is our pattern, so to speak. Now I take my little 5/8 inch washer, and I'm sorry for keep turning this, but I take my 5/8 inch washer and I run it up here and I just give myself a nice little round effect there. That essentially is the sheath pattern. Okay, and the measurements again that we used, so 1.5 inches to the first line, 2 inches to the next line, 2 inches again, and 2 inches. And then the cross hatch lines, bottom is 2 1/4, 2 1/2, 2 5/8. That gives us our sort of evolving sheath there. And we are done. Okay, now we have the pattern complete and we're ready to transfer this and begin the fabrication on leather. So the first thing I do is I go to my laser printer and I make a second cardstock copy of this pattern. I keep that on file for future builds, and the second one I use for the actual build itself. I then take a number 2 X-Acto knife. It gives me pencil-like control, and you cut out the entire pattern, again splitting the ink line. That leaves you with the final pattern. So now take your leather stock, and this is 8 to 9 ounce. It's not the best for these video builds. Use the finest leather that you can afford, and your final sheath will also look so much nicer. So take your paper pattern, place it on to the grain side of the leather, and the pattern piece would be up like this, and then just trace it out with an ink pen. That ink pen will be cut out later and edged, and it won't be a problem. So once you have that, then I go ahead and just mark a little F on the inside of that side to indicate that that is the front or face of the pattern. Take your same pattern piece and now just flip it over for the back side. Trace that out, because on this particular style of sheath, you have a front piece, a back piece, a welt, and of course the straps, and I'll show all of that in the fabrication steps. But anyway, now you have that done. Now it's nothing more than taking your favorite knife, whatever that may be, and cutting out your pattern. Remember, split the ink line, use 2 or 3 passes if necessary, and just take your time. Don't splay in or splay out. Keep it 90 degrees and you'll get a nice flush edge. On these areas here that have these tight inside curves, you can use mechanical advantage by using a punch. You can punch out the inside curves, maybe on an outside curve. If you have one of these corner punches, you can use that as well. Just gives you a little bit more control on some of these difficult to cut out areas. Everything else are straight lines. So that is the step to start your build with. Now let's say we've cut that out, and I went ahead and did that here. Again, this is my front face. So the next step here is to clean up your edges, and the best way to do that is with a, well, you've seen it before, just a salon board fingernail file. Make sure all these edges are 90 degrees. For these tight inside curves, I use a Dremel with a small sanding drum, and then I just sand those curves into a nice, pleasing shape. Okay, once you have that, then we'll want to go ahead and edge top and bottom of this handle guard or sweat shields on both pieces, and top and bottom. Sand them, burnish them, you know, do all of the process that needs to be done. All right, let's go ahead and prep for the next step, and I'll show you that. All right, let me show you a couple of things that I do that might be a little bit unusual, but they work. So in order to get a nice smooth edge on these single ply parts here on the sheath, I take a small felt wheel that I get from the Dremel aisle, and I mount it onto a small Dremel shaft. Then I place it into my Dremel tool, and I load it with wax. Once that's completely loaded, you'll notice a groove has developed there, and that is from this operation right here. So this makes it really nice. It gets into that tight curve, and you can do this until you get the edge that you want. The more time that you take here, the better. So anyway, that's a nice little tip for you. And then once you do that to both sides, then I'll moisten the face and the back piece again, and I'll establish my maker's mark. This whole blank canvas here, you can basket weave, you can carve, you can do whatever you want. On the back piece, I usually place my maker's mark and anything else you want. Here's another little tip. I have a maker's mark from Steel Stamp Incorporated. These things are absolutely wonderful. They're $200–300, and because I'm so clumsy, I just get a cigar tube that I've placed a sponge type material in the bottom, and then that way they are drop proof. And a little tip for you. Anyway, now that we have these, now what we need to do is go ahead and take our pattern and cut out the welt part. And once you have the welt part, what I usually do is I take on the face side, and then I just lay it on here and trace out where the welt is going to be glued. So these ink lines here show a couple of things. Number one, it shows where you'll need to glue and where to place the welt. And I always place the welt on my face piece. So the little notch that's going to create that, that lock, on this particular style, it's made for a left hip cross draw carry or a left-handed small of the back sheath. So I'm not a big fan of small of the back items, but these give you plenty of options. And obviously, if you were going to do the opposite, the cutout would be on this side. That's just something that you're going to have to sort of figure out yourself. Once you have that, I do the same thing on my back piece, again, giving me indicators where the glue line's going to be. Once that's done, then we have to prepare our welt. And the way we do that is we get some good 10-ounce leather stock, nice and firm. And I mean, it could be 10, 11 ounce. I just like a nice firm welt. Take my pattern, place it on there, and then prepare it for cutting out. We'll do that in another step. Also punch here a hole at the apex so it doesn't tear out. It makes it easier to cut there as well. So we'll work on that here in a little bit. Another thing that we have to do is we have to make our straps. I like a pretty stout strap. So these are 8, 9, 10 ounce leather straps. And they're in the 3/4 to 7/8 of an inch width. One thing that I like to do is when I keep my pattern is I take a little piece of this scrap, and once I get the size, I just place it into my my strap cutter. I push it up against that, and now I have the exact strap that I need for this particular project. And that just stays with the pattern. I don't have to remeasure or guess. So I went ahead and cut out the inside of the welt, and I notched the half guard hole with a 1/2 inch craft tool hole punch, and that fits perfectly for the half guard that we're going to use. All right, so I also take these inside corners here and just give it a little 45-degree clip. So we don't want that sharp little edge there. And now it is prepped. So I'm going to take my face piece and I'm going to place it on those ink lines just to do a dry fit. As you can see now, with it in that position, when the knife goes in there and it's leveled like that, that is for a left hip cross draw or a left-handed SOB. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and rough this up here, and I'm gonna glue outside of the line because I might have to give this a 1/16 of an inch or so add on. I have to maybe squeeze it in a little bit, and this is where the fine tuning comes into play. I'll show you that as we do that. So let me go ahead and scratch that up and get it ready for mount. So now what I've done is I've went ahead and just used a few clamps to place the welt on. And if you'll notice here, I set it directly on this particular line. Now, because knife sheaths and leather, it's not a precision machined project. We don't use micrometers. Everything is somewhat fine tuning like this. So what I do, and this knife has a really nice narrow profile, so we're not going to need an additional welt other than this 10-ounce piece. So I'm going to place the knife in there, and I'm going to run the spine of the knife sheath up against here. And now here's, with this side, I have a little bit of a play. Now my initial indication is right here. Now there's the other piece is going to be sandwiched on there and is going to provide the compression. But I might want that just a hair, or maybe a 1/16 of an inch past that initial line that we drew. So the knife is going to come out of the sheath and the half guard will bind on this, and then once it pushes past, it'll drop in and then lock. So I'm satisfied that this is going to work, and I have enough room with the welt for this knife to come out. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to re-establish this side of the welt. And that's why we cut the welt piece extra long. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to glue it to this line here, and this is going to give us our welt. And I'm satisfied with the way that's going to work. All right, I'm going to apply glue. I went ahead and scratched both sides of the grain side here, and I will glue it, and we will be back. So we sandwiched the, or we glued, I should say, the welt to the face. We have everything in position. This obviously will be trimmed, and I'm satisfied that the position of the knife, once it's sandwiched with the back piece that's going to be a real nice fit, and I'm confident that we'll get the lock that we're looking for. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and off camera, I'm going to trim this glued piece off, the excess here, and then I'm going to establish my stitch lines, and I'll show you how I do that. So we went ahead and glued the welt in, and I moistened slightly the face of the sheath so that we can establish the stitch lines. And we're going to, like on this particular model, we're going to sew the straps in. And you can also use Chicago screws here. I will show you that second method, but for this particular build, let's go ahead and replicate this one where the straps are sewn in. So what we have to do is we have to make sure that our stitches are not going to go into this little groove here. So we're going to adjust our wing dividers so that we know that the stitches are going to come right about here. We don't want them any closer to that notch. And then that's going to give us our stitch line on the inside. So I just take the same measurement and I establish where the welt is on the face side to make sure that I have plenty of room for the sewing, and I will do a double row in this particular case. So I take it down to the bottom and I run it up onto this side as well. And now that is my stitch line indicator, and obviously this is going to be hand sewn, and at this step here that I'm going to use my number 5 stitching irons, and let's go ahead and just do that off camera. So I'm going to go ahead and establish my inside stitch lines, and then I will establish also a second row of stitch lines from here, which is about 1/8 of an inch. Bring it there to the center. And even with the top. I'm going to go ahead and pre-mark my stitch holes, and we'll be back. We went ahead and glued, I think I've already said that, but we went ahead and glued the welt on here, and I went ahead and drilled out the holes. I try to keep this video sort of geared towards the beginner, somebody who, in my opinion, hasn't quite mastered the use of the diamond awl, and I like to show you that you can, even with a drill press and a 1/16 inch bit, you can make a professional looking stitch. So I went ahead and drilled them through based on the markings of the 5mm stitching iron. And if you'll notice right here by the cutout, it doesn't go into the cutout. So we are all systems go. Everything is exactly the way I want it. Now I'm going to go ahead and die all the pieces. The straps I went ahead and burnished with the Dremel tool earlier. It makes a pretty quick job of that. And all of the pieces, these are 11 inches by the way, they probably will still have to be trimmed a little bit. But I'm going to go ahead and dye this since it's late at night. First effect, I'm going to use Fiebing's tan leather dye. And let's go ahead and do that real quick. And we're just going to, this is your typical dauber technique. I try to make it as even as I can. It's just something that you have to play with. You can dip dye these. I think they get a little bit darker that way. But anyway, this should color out nice overnight, and in the morning we'll show you all the pieces. We'll come back and we'll see how that looks. So these have dried overnight. It's pleasing enough shade of light brown for me. Of course, we're going to do some finishing techniques that'll darken this up a little bit. Anything that is used in the outdoors, as far as I'm concerned, I like using a wax-based finished, snow seal, etc., that type of stuff. But we'll talk about that in a moment. So when they first are ready, nothing's been done, you'll notice there's a slight sheen on these. And the reason for that is I take a stiff bristle brush and I slightly burnish the surface. So any pigment from that dye is basically burnished away. And we have our pieces all set to go. Now I went ahead and redid the straps because it was late last night and I got sloppy and just didn't like the appearance of them. So I went ahead this morning and did a couple of new straps. Again, they are extra long. All you need to sort of start with is about 11 inches, which still requires a little bit of trimming. All right, so I went ahead and edged, slightly sanded, and used one of these dye daubers from Maker's Leather Supply, applied a dark brown finish, and burnished it. All right, let's go ahead and off camera, what I'm going to do is I am going to finish burnishing and dyeing and burnishing this edge strap. Then all our pieces will be done, and then we'll show you the next step. Beginners, knife makers, if you don't have a sewing machine, you haven't mastered the skill of using a diamond point awl, don't let anybody tell you that this is something you shouldn't use. This works wonderfully. Once you establish the stitch spacing with your 5mm or a 4mm stitching iron, then just keep it flat on your Dremel drill press base. Establish a speed that won't bog down or won't burn the leather, and then just start stitching or drilling your holes. And as long as you keep it flat and you have the right speed on your drill bit, which is a 1/16 inch bit, I'll continue on here in a moment, but if you'll notice, let me make sure that's in there. That's the front, and that's the back. The holes are straight, and once we sew that, most people can't tell that it was done this way. All right, let's finish this off camera and move on to the next step on this particular sheath that has the Chicago screws to hold the straps in. I went ahead and drilled out all my holes. They're straight. The sheath has been slightly moistened with a little bit of water and saddle soap, and then I went ahead and started. So there's going to be three sections to stitch. This main section and these two sections here in between the holes. If you'll notice, I only I punched the holes for the Chicago screws only on the top piece. So now I'm just gonna, you can put this in a clamp, you can do this however you want. This style of stitching may not display the traditional characteristics of an angled stitch, but I personally think this stitch looks good, and I'm going to go ahead and sew some more off camera, and then once it's sewn up, I'll show you how the flattening effect takes place. And if you'll notice, they are nice straight stitches. They're pulled in snug, basically at the surface level. That's another thing that I don't do. I don't groove my stitch lines. I don't feel it's necessary. And I've been using the drill press method on and off for years, decades. The stitching is complete. They are pulled snug. and straight. So once we do that, then it's nothing more. I went ahead and edged it too, you'll notice that, with a large edger, preparing for a final finish. So now take a nice convex hammer. You can also buy a cheap tack hammer and convex it on your grinder and polish it up. So now if you'll notice, I will show you the stitches are basically flat. And we're going to take our convex hammer and I use a solid surface like a marble, piece of glass. Just going to do half to show you the difference. The wax threads get flattened and fill the holes. This is unhammered yet, so you can see the difference. All right, now on this version here with the Chicago screws, again, we just punched the holes out on the face. Now I'm going to take a drill bit the same size, keep it flat on the drill press, and drill out those holes. Yes, you can drill leather. Make sure it's dry. All right, you'll notice I chucked the appropriate size drill bit into my table-mounted drill press, and I'm just going to drill these holes. Make sure that this stays flat. Make sure the leather is dry. Okay, you'll notice they're right in line. Oh, I missed one. Okay, they are drilled out. And we're going to establish now the safety straps. Actually, we're going to wet mold this to the knife first before you put the straps on, because that'll affect the actual fit. Okay, we definitely have a lot going on here, but I hope it's worthy of your time. So in this particular sheet that we just sewed and drilled the holes out, we're going to go ahead and wet mold it. If you'll notice on the picture insert, this one here doesn't have the stop. It's just your basic sheath, which you can wet mold to a few. All right, so we're going to take our sheath, we're going to dump it in some warm water for 5 to 8 seconds. A lot of times I'll stick it in a plastic bag and let it case, but it's not really necessary. Just make sure it's nice and damp. So we're going to open that sheath up a little bit, and we're going to force it into its seated position. And now, I hope I'm in camera, we're just going to take it and use our thumbs and mold around that half guard. You can use tools if you like to help you mold that. But I find a lot of times that just the thumb work itself will do it. And I don't put any saran wrap or anything around my blade. I will wipe it down and oil it afterwards. I like the actual shape of the blade because the saran wrap will make it a little bit thicker. Go ahead and pull that out, and we're gonna let that dry before we set the straps on. So I'm gonna set it out in my Arizona sunshine, and it should be ready to go in about 10 minutes. Back to our regularly scheduled program. While the other sheath is drying, I'm gonna go ahead and work on this. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna take this sheath that we had worked on earlier with the stop welt, and I'm gonna glue those together. I'm gonna let it cure for a little bit, and then I'm going to drill out my holes. And when I get ready to sew this, I will use 4 separate saddle stitching threads. I will sew from the center, up, back tack. I will do the same thing on this side, up and back tack, and vice versa on this side. So that'll give us a nice tight stitch, and the threads won't have a tendency to fray, And I don't like sewing with too much more than a wingspan's worth of thread anyway. So these are all set. The straps are dry and ready to go. That we can't do. That we can't have. That's Arizona sun was a little too. I have learned so much from my mistakes that I think I'll keep making more. So anyway, good opportunity in this, as now I'm going to do it correctly. Take the straps while they're in their raw veg-tan state, moisten them, use whatever creasing method you want. This is when they should be done before you dye, and don't leave leather out in 100+ degree temperature because it will bake, not dry. All right, I know that. I live here. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and sew this, glue it and sew it, and let the straps dry. I'm gonna dye them, and we're back on track. Let's do a little progress report. And I went ahead and completely sewed the sheath, a double seam, and it looks pretty good. All the stitches are nice and tight, pulled in snug, and I'm happy with them. I went ahead also and then used my wing divider and established some decorative lines on each side of the stitch line, and that's also done with this method. Once the once the wing dividers have made their marks, you can go in and burnish and deepen the lines with this inexpensive tool. All right, after that, we went ahead and did the edges up to 800 grit. I started with a 60 grit flap wheel to 150 and then hand sanded to 800. You can do that ad nauseum until it's basically a piece of glass. This is a working sheath, so 800 is good enough. I usually go 6. All right, that is it with the decorative part. Then I went ahead and took the sheath and placed it into a tub of warm water for about 2 seconds, literally. And just enough to get the internal fibers of the leather wet, and but not soggy, because you don't want that at all. And once it came back to color, so to speak, let that absorb for a few. I took the knife and I placed it into the sheath. We're not molding it to the handle. We're molding it primarily just to help it seat into that notch. And when this thing is completely dry, you will hear that audible lock in place. That knife is not coming out unless you pull it out. But anyway, now I have it in position, and I will be perfectly honest with you, that little tweak of the welt that I did earlier was not necessary. It made it a little bit snug. A good knife sheath, like a holster, when you first get it, should be very tight, and just with a little bit of time and loosening, it'll blend itself into a perfect fit. And that's what we have here. I should have trusted the process. So when you're doing this, take that into consideration, okay? Again, it's all handwork, it's all fine-tuning. You know, we're not building anything with a lathe here. All right, so that is done. I've got my straps, 3rd time's the charm, and we are ready to sew those on and set up our snaps. And I will show you also the Chicago screw method, and we are close to the finale. Now the fun part begins, and everything can't always be easy. So what we're going to do is go ahead and set up our straps. And the first thing that I do, if you'll notice on this strap, I punched 4 holes from each guideline, and they are even. On my sheath, you should be able to see I have 6 holes. So this is going to be placed right there, and then on each outside hole, we're going to double tack these down. And it isn't as difficult as it seems, but it is a nail biter sometimes, especially when you're drilling in between this stitch line. So let me go ahead and set up the snaps on here. And initially, like I showed you, had the snaps on there. I want to get a general idea if they're going to work. I take my wing dividers, and as close as I can. Of course, you can measure that. I'm going to give myself an idea where those need to go. I'm going to punch some holes, set my snaps, and then we're going to sew this front piece onto the sheath. As you can see, I did both sides. So the sewing will go real easy. It's just challenging to make sure that everything is nice and true. All right, off camera, I'm going to do that. The straps are now sewn in. Once you pre-punch the straps and pre-punch the sheath itself, getting that first stitch to lock in and hold is a little challenging, a little handsy, but once you get that first stitch locked in, then it's nothing more than just sewing the other holes, and they sort of line up automatically. I went ahead and moistened the straps on the inside. I have a 2-inch belt loop stock that I'm going to place on the back, and then it's nothing more than molding, doing the best you can to pull that super snug. Okay, once you get that snug, run it over the other snaps and push down, and you'll get an indication here where your cap snaps, 24-line cap snaps, need to go. All right, so once we have that there, we can determine how much extra we want. So let's, just to show you, I'm going to go ahead and set the snaps on these and trim the front piece to a pleasing length, and we'll be ready to do the second half and call this sheath complete. We've set our snaps, and we've trimmed the ends to about 1 inch or so from the end 24-line cap. I use these new copper colored 24-line caps that I found at Tandy my last trip there. I don't really like them. They're a little soft, and you can see the imprint of the post. But anyway, nonetheless, it's done. We have our Scout Carry sheath. The sheath itself is still a little damp and a little tight, but we do achieve the lock that we need. Once this is completely dry, we'll have a more audible pop. Anyway, I'm satisfied. So another thing that I usually add with these is the option of a vertical carry instead of a horizontal carry. And it's nothing more than 8-9 ounce piece of veg tan, 2 inches by 8 inches, and I set up 4 snaps. And all this is an option for the user. To wear it vertical. Okay, so fun project, challenging project. You can't go out to Walmart and buy one of these. We're the only ones that have them available, us makers. So hope you enjoyed that. Hope you make one yourself, and challenge yourself to make each piece on the sheath the best that you can make it. All right, let me show you real quick now the easy version, and on this basic, just a quick little demonstration piece. It's nothing more than the 2 stud and post Chicago screws. I didn't have any available, so I used whatever I had. They have to be long enough to get through the 2 sheath faces and the welt, and then they lock into the back, and you place them onto your sheath. All right, and the way it's done is nothing more than you take a strap, and on these holes that you pre-punched earlier, you just get a measurement for where they need to be. You take your Chicago screws and you place them through the strap. Once these studs are set on there, run them through the sheath, and then you do the same molding process for the top strap. A lot easier, looks a little bit cheaper, but I think once the sheath is completely done and you have some good Chicago screws, that'll work for you. Okay, let's take another look at this, and we are done. I hope you gained something from this video. I know it was a little choppy at times. I did try to get a little too much in here, but I hope it's worth your time to sit through. And we thank you for coming along with this build. So one additional thing, I went ahead and finished this with a snow seal and a heat gun. I put it on fairly thick and let it melt into the stitch line and the straps and the whole sheath. That's why the sheath is a lot darker. I'll probably put one more coat on there, but this is how I finish a sheath that's going to be out in the wild. You can also use Resin with an airbrush, and then you can use an atom wax on top of that. Finishing is rather personal. I just think that anything that's going to be out in the field should be wax-based and something that the user can reapply when needed. Thank you.